Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Johnson, and I am the current president of the Minnesota Ambulance Association and also the Community Paramedicine Coordinator for Mayo Clinic Ambulance. All right, the Minnesota Ambulance Association represents over 90% of the ground ambulance volume in Minnesota. In 2024, ground ambulance services impacted the lives of more than 600,000 Minnesotans. These aren't just patients, these are our neighbors, friends, and family members. Real people in need of help during their most vulnerable moments. Emergency medical services is a safety net of our healthcare system. We are ready to respond 24/7 to emergencies across the state. When people call 911, we deliver critical, high-quality pre-hospital care where it is needed around the clock. From the heart of Minneapolis to the rural communities that define our state, Minnesotans rely on us. However, the EMS system is facing immense pressure. Our current challenges are not just straining the system, they're putting lives at risk. The challenges we face can be summarized into two critical areas: workforce and funding. When it comes to funding, we are required to respond to emergencies regardless of our ability to get paid. Reimbursement rates, particularly from government programs, are inconsistent with and often fall short of covering the actual cost of providing care. This has led to a dire financial situation for many EMS agencies with a statewide underfunding that has been substantially reported over the last couple of years. Our system is built on a flawed model that primarily reimburses only for patients transported to the ED. However, readiness, such as maintaining ambulances, equipment, trained staff, and being able to respond 24/7 is a significant ongoing expense that is not adequately covered. On workforce, this financial strain directly impacts our ability to recruit and retain qualified personnel. EMS professionals face demanding work, and inadequate funding limits our ability to offer competitive salaries and benefits. This contributes to burnout and shortages of EMTs and paramedics, which can lead to longer response times and compromised care. These are not abstract problems. The consequences of underfunding and workforce shortages are real and have serious implications for Minnesotans. Services are being forced to cut shifts, lose staff, and in some cases shut down entirely. This translates to longer wait times for critical care, especially in rural areas where distance is already an issue. Delayed response times can have devastating consequences for patients experiencing life-threatening emergencies such as heart attacks, strokes, or severe trauma. We cannot allow this vital safety net to unravel. So we are here today to urge our lawmakers to take immediate action to address this crisis. We are calling for the following: pass ongoing EMS sustainability funding to stabilize the EMS system and ensure its long-term viability. We'd like to see this be at a roughly $50 million. Increase Medicaid reimbursement rates to reflect the true cost of providing emergency medical care, and continue to support workforce funding programs such as the EMT and paramedic scholarship programs, EMT and first responder training programs, and high school EMS training programs. These investments are crucial for recruiting and retaining the next generation of EMS professionals and ensuring that all Minnesotans have access to the emergency care they deserve. EMS providers have always been there for Minnesotans in their greatest time of need. Now we need our lawmakers to be there for EMS. Let's work together to ensure a strong and sustainable EMS system for Minnesota. Thank you. And next up, we've got Senator Grant Huschild.
Thanks. Well, thanks, everybody. I'm Grant Huschild. I'm the state senator from the largest and most rural district in the state. And I want us to imagine for a second that you're at home, maybe on Lake Vermilion up in northern Minnesota, and your loved one has a heart attack. You dial 911 and you're waiting and waiting for an ambulance. Think about that. This is a moral imperative issue. In our rural communities, we are not seeing the sustainability of ambulance services for people when their lives are at risk. And we've been calling out, not just on the state side, figuring out solutions to this issue, but I've traveled to Washington, D.C. twice First with myself and a representative from the Iron Range, and secondly with our EMS task force at the state level to really push our federal delegation to say, you've got to do something about reimbursement rates for Medicare and Medicaid. Because if we don't get these reimbursement rates fixed at the federal level, we're never gonna actually solve this issue. But barring the federal government not doing anything, which they normally don't, we're gonna look at state solutions to figure out this issue. So last year, we brought forward an EMS aid package that directed funding to rural services to make sure that they were sustainable, that ambulances had the money, could recruit the workforce they need in order to get to those emergency situations in our rural communities. The reason that our rural communities are facing the challenges that they are is compounding, right? We have an aging population in our rural communities. Most of those folks are on Medicare and Medicaid, and those reimbursement rates aren't being at the level that they're needed in order to cover these services. In addition, many of our rural services have relied on volunteers to go into these services to help provide life-saving care. We can no longer rely on volunteers for many of these services. People are strained as it is. So what we're doing is we're putting forward a package of sustainable EMS funding for our rural services to ensure that the state is stepping up and saying this is a moral imperative. We are going to ensure, regardless of your zip code, that an ambulance can arrive and that we're not passing those costs on to local rural residents who already can't afford the things that they have in front of them. The other thing we're doing is looking at workforce incentives like the previous speaker talked about, making sure that our schools are training the future of EMS providers. This is what we need, particularly in our rural communities. And I want to thank Representative Zalesnikar, who worked with me across the aisle on legislation to get some of those high school trainings in our district in northern Minnesota. And lastly, we need to look at the Medicaid match at the state level so that we're providing higher reimbursements for these rural services. But I want to be clear. If we're going to increase the Medicaid match, it has to be targeted at rural communities because frankly, that is where people are drowning when it comes to these life-saving care. And if we're gonna provide state matching dollars at the federal level, then we need to make sure it's targeted in the right places. So those are the things we're working on. We're challenging other legislators to listen to us in rural communities so that we're addressing this emergency ahead of us. And I hope we can get something done again this year. Thanks so much for listening to us. And Representative Backer, I think you're up next.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I'm Jeff Backer, Representative Jeff Backer. I serve the western part of Minnesota. So if you look on that hump, tip, elbow, nose, that's where I'm at. I also volunteer as an EMT. I've been doing that for roughly 30 years. Our district actually goes into South Dakota, Minnesota, and we actually service two nations because we provide ambulance service for the Sisseton-Wahpeton tribe. So I am one of those volunteers. Generally, when I get back in the district, I'm on because right now we have 4 EMTs and the rest of the spots are filled by EMRs. And that's what we're looking at on the House side, in the Senate, but especially on the House side, we're looking at solutions. Because at the end of the day, when someone dials 911, you want to rig there, it doesn't matter if it's your daughter, granddaughter, your neighbor, your father, your grandfather, grandmother, you want that solution for them. Also, I'm honored this year to serve as chair, co-chair, as many of you know, 67 tie on the House, which has made it very interesting. And one of my members on one of my, on the other side would say, are we hearing another EMS bill in committee? Absolutely we are. Because we have not prioritized it. The last session, we were able to get things accomplished, but EMS has not been a priority for the state. What we're looking in on our side of the aisle is how we deliver health care good. We're looking at the services. We don't need a bigger government to do that because health care is provided by the providers. If it's EMS, if it's hospitals, dentists, mental health, it's done at the level of the patient and so forth. And as EMS is more than just going to ER, even though a lot of times we have an issue with our rural hospitals. When I am on Friday nights and Saturday nights, I become part of the ER. But EMS, that system is so important. Let me give you an example. Last April, we had an ambulance run. Pager went off, I don't remember, but it was around 8 o'clock, we'll say in the evening. Full cardiac arrest. It was in the town next door, 7 miles away, Beardsley. Luckily, my partner was in Beardsley, responded directly to the scene. So we had someone there within 1 minute. The rest of the first responders from Beardsley came, got to Lucas, which does your chest compressions, hooked at the defib, was not allowed to shock for rhythm. I hopped in the rig. I got there within 7 minutes from the time that the pager was off. Of course, I was running hot. We got there, paged him one more time. Of course, this was in a restaurant behind the bar, and the person was behind the bar. As our EMS professionals will know back here, they never collapse in the best perfect place. So we got him back there, got him in the rig. We are lucky to have telehealth, turned that on, took off, and put an advanced airway in the patient, and he is here with us today. This is why we have to back the system. And that's what we're working on is solutions, as we heard earlier, good solutions. And as you heard earlier, the challenge that we have, why our service has a pancake feed. Think about it, folks. We do a pancake feed every November. It's going to be, I think, our 27th. My wife, myself, my twin brother, yes, there's two of me, we do, and that's good or bad, it depends who you ask, and he's an EMT too. But we have to do a pancake feed, and then we send out a letter. We raise about $25,000 to $30,000 every year. So when someone dials 911 because of the low reimbursements rate or uncompensated care that we don't get because the wheels don't turn, because when we show up to a scene and it's a no load or they come in with a helicopter, advanced EMS, because I'm a basic EMT, if we don't put them in that rig, Browns Valley Ambulance does not get paid. So guess what though? We still had to been the first responders. We still had to put on the Lucas. We still had to do CPR. We still had to administer oxygen, all the stuff that we can do. So it is time, and I am focused on prioritizing it. And these good folks are helping me. So with that, now I'm turning over to Becca. She is not a constituent of mine because she's in the other part of Otter Tail County. But I'm going to introduce Becca from the Perm Ambulance. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Becca Hipsch. I'm the Director of Perham Area EMS. We are a rural ambulance in Otter Tail County that serves about 400 square miles in the Lakes Country of Minnesota. We cover a large area with limited resources, but a very dedicated staff. Every day, we stretch to provide high-quality pre-hospital care with low reimbursement and unpredictable funding. Our model is broken. Here's how it works. Regardless of a patient's ability to pay or local government support, we must respond to every request for an ambulance and ensure 24/7 availability of staff, medications, equipment, and ambulances. We're paid only when a patient is transported, not when we respond, assess, or treat at the scene. That means that our revenue is directly tied to volume, even though our costs stay high, no matter how many calls we take. Because of the large areas we are responsible for, we can't just run fewer trucks or scale back service. Because when someone calls 911, they need immediate expert care. People's lives depend on it. The answer is emergency funding now, paired with long-term sustainable funding mechanisms for EMS. We need to prioritize workforce and policy solutions that train more EMS professionals, support leadership development, especially in rural areas, expand methods for sustainable rural ambulances, and fix the reimbursement system so services can plan and continue to survive. EMS providers show up with expert skill and compassion. They do so every day, regardless of distance, weather, the last 72 hours they spent on call, or whether or not they're going to get paid for the services that they provide. But they can't do it alone. We need Minnesota to back us up. Thank you. Bradley.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bradley Peterson. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, and it is my great honor to stand with our legislative champions and these great providers who are providing this service across the state. EMS is a key pillar of healthcare across Greater Minnesota. The reason that the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities is involved in this issue is 50% of the licenses for ambulance providers are held by local governments, large and small, and in some cases, very small. And they are serving, in some cases, service territories that are hundreds of square miles. That's a big chunk of territory to cover. And in many cases, the cost of covering those hundreds of square miles is just on that one city. So even though they might be covering the township next to them or the city 5 miles away, all of the costs that are unrecovered fall on the property taxpayers in that city. And the cities are stretched. They're stretched in terms of managing their budgets. They're stretched in terms of trying to make sure that property taxes don't skyrocket. But they're also doing all of this work because of a commitment to the public safety and the residents and visitors that they serve. But this can't continue. Cities are saying loud and clear that we need the state to step up. When EMS fails, the whole system suffers. Patients wait longer, outcomes worsen, and communities are left vulnerable. So state support is essential, and we're asking lawmakers to pass both short-term and long-term sustainable funding for rural communities and all of the other things that the folks here have mentioned in terms of workforce, the Medicare matching, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there's a lot of time still to go in the legislative session. We've got 5 weeks, 6 weeks or so, and there's going to be a lot of toing and froing, and there's going to be a lot of proposals that fly back and forth. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, before they adjourn, the legislature needs to back up communities across the state. They need to back up these folks standing behind me here and make sure that they find a solution that is sustainable for our ambulance services across the state. So with that, I think the group here is happy to take questions.
Can we talk about how this fits into the targets, budget targets that we've gotten from both the Senate and House side of things?
I can talk about
Any
that.
of our, yeah.
I think that's a question. You know, it comes down, good question, it comes about prioritizing, and that's, we still are in negotiations with our colleagues on the House, which is unique. Mostly you don't have to negotiate this hard with your other colleagues with a 67-67 tie. Health has exchanged 9 offers, so I think we have won the #1 offer. So I have been and will continue to fight for EMS dollars. There are struggles because there's so many things in health. At the end of the day, my focus is to strengthen the systems, and EMS is part of it, emergency medical service. So it does add interesting dynamics, plus we have a target that cut money from health, both in the front and in the tails, but that's my focus.
In the Senate and House, they're both folded into the Health and Human Services.
Yeah, when we get into conference committee, Health and Human will work together, so then we have a bigger piece of the pie. Human's a whole different breed compared to health. We just have a smaller piece of pie to work with.
You talk about last year, I believe it was $120 million in need. You eventually got 30 or 40 million. Just first, how far behind are you at this point? You're only asking for 50. Are you still 90 behind or more?
We have a lot of good programs that we need to fund to sustain this. At the same time, we also recognize that there's, we do not have an $18 billion surplus, okay? We do not have that surplus. So we have to work within the means that we have. So that ask is reasonable. As anything else, could we get more? You know, we have some good programs on earning while you're learning. Chief author on the House side on that, also chief author on the House side with raising medical rates. We also have a package to help rural ambulances, which is very important because our metro colleagues love to go to the lakes if it's up in the north or if it's out west. Otter Tail County, as Becca could tell you, we have that county doubles in population. Our county does too on the weekends. So we would love to have more, but we also have to work within the means that we're given, and that's what we're doing right now.
Talk about what improvements we may have seen over the last year based on the funding that was given last year.
I do not know all of them, but I can talk about the people that I represent close to my district. What we have seen is For the volunteers, call time pay has increased. I know one service has done that particularly. Now, we're not talking about hundreds of dollars. We're talking going from $2 on call to $5 on call, okay? I know Ashby Service needed a change to one of their bays so they could get their ambulance inside and have the room that they need and so forth. So that grant was to be extremely flexible. I don't know if Becca, you want to comment on what you did with that? Here, come.
So for Perham Area EMS, we were really thankful because we received about $192,000 from the state aid last year, which was a major impact for us as a publicly owned ambulance. So we decided to use that money to remount one of our older ambulances that was at the end of its life. So that meant moving the patient care compartment to a new chassis, which had we not received that funding, would have been coming a request of the taxpayers. Even with that, though, I do like to point out that our need that year was closer to $500,000. So it made a huge impact in our budget, but the one-time funding fell short for even that year. So we appreciate everything that we've gotten, but we need more help. And thank you for the question.
I might add, can I just add a really quick piece to this? And it's similar to what you were just saying, but these rural services are so underwater that even the little bit of aid they get didn't make a dent, right? And so they're just trying to make up for the debt that they already have. I have some services in northern Minnesota with over $1 million in debt on EMS services. So they're either looking at huge levy increases at the local level to pay for it, but then they get this injection of money and they have to make these strategic decisions. Do I pay off debt and not really make a dent, or do I buy the new ambulance that we're gonna have to buy anyway? So they are just constantly in this cycle of crisis that I think the aid was helpful in getting them sort of a little bit of a lifeline, but we're not talking any sort of proactive, big moves that allowed them to be more strategic. It was more, hey, we were able to do a little bit here with the little bit we got.
Is there a dollar amount estimate for like what the need is total statewide?
Yeah, so in 2023, the EMSRB, now the Office of EMS, had done a study throughout the state of Minnesota looking at the services. And the $120 million that was referenced earlier was where that number came from. So that was the operational deficits that were brought in from the services that provided information back to the state, along with a dollar amount that was there for the volunteer subsidy. So roughly half of that was operational deficit. The other half was what volunteers were contributing to the system. And so we had used that number originally to move forward. And we were asking for that emergency funding last year, which we were very grateful. We got $24 million that went to rural services. That was really just to stop that immediate bleed while we spent more time trying to create a package like we're seeing this year to look at long-term.
So how far does $50 million each year ongoing help offset that ongoing need, which may or may not be growing?
So at the end of the day, we know that it appears that there's still a larger deficit than that operational deficit that's happening. So this won't completely offset the tax burden and stuff that's out there throughout the state. And these numbers really are coming primarily from rural services. So this is the areas where their volume does not generate enough revenue coming in for them to even self-sustain. But even for the urban areas, we're seeing that the governmental reimbursement model, as we see more and more people entering into that, and we know that that's going to continue for years to come, is already financially straining even the places that have high volumes. But in those urban areas, if we can get $50 million to help offset a lot of those costs, yes, there's still going to be some tax burden, but it would greatly diminish the hit that they're taking. And we saw ambulance services put out for RFP to sell and stuff, within the last couple of years. And it wasn't because they weren't happy with their ambulance service. It's just they couldn't continue to see the increasing tax burden when, with inflation and other costs, they just couldn't keep up.
Can you talk about the training programs that have been, funded from last year? I know Mayo has a big one. They're around the state. How is that addressing staffing to overcome?
Yeah, there's been a couple of great ones. The paramedic scholarship that was put out through higher ed, I think now it's just completing its second year. You could apply for up to $5,000 per year to go to paramedic school as an existing EMT. That program was hugely successful. It was really well advertised, really well utilized through the Office of Higher Ed. We saw a lot of potential there. We've been trying to find out ways to hit up programs within high school programs. There's been a couple of models throughout the state have shown that really good promise that we hope to use to expand that out, to try to get more people into the industry earlier. So yeah, we've seen a lot there, and we think that's a high need to continue to see investment.
Can someone speak to Medicaid? I know you guys have said that you already aren't reimbursed for the total cost, but how problematic if Medicaid cuts come at the federal level, which state officials have said would really imperil the state's budget, how much that would impact what you guys do?
So today, right now CMS and Medicaid, are becoming one of the largest payer sources for almost every ambulance service in the state. And we do see that those costs don't cover it. So we hope that the private insurance will try to make up some of the difference today. If there are cuts to the Medicare or Medicaid programs, I mean, even by a percentage or two, it's devastating to our ambulance services. I mean, it's millions and millions of dollars for a lot of the services. And when it's and so right now, there is a bill currently moving through that we're looking at requesting a 10% increase for Medicaid in the state of Minnesota. And we know that that's a hard ask this year. I mean, we totally understand that dollars are a struggle. But again, we have ambulance services that are not sure how they're going to keep their doors open. So something is needed.
There's a special tax district bill that's in House taxes this morning, and I wonder if that's something will help with ongoing funding.
Yeah, I know of the couple that are out there.
Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure the specific proposal in the House, but I know I've looked at ideas where we can try to get at this concept of one small community covering hundreds of miles. And how do we make it so that those other areas of that rural community are paying into that EMS service? We have a lot of these challenges on the Iron Range. So we're looking at that. The one challenge is right now, all of them have to be bought into that concept. And we really struggle with that, right? If you are essentially guaranteed that service from that local community, it's a lot harder to then agree to increase your own taxes. So this is that sort of chicken or egg problem we're facing in a lot of these rural communities, but we are looking at solutions on how we can create these taxing districts. I will say, for example, Cloquet has a fire district that they created a while back as sort of a model of how this might be able to look for EMS. So we are looking at solutions, but again, I personally think this is a moral imperative at the state and federal level. It should not be up to those local property owners in these small towns and even rural surrounding communities to pay for these services when you have private providers covering these licenses in the profitable areas of the state. So just to be clear, usually it's private providers providing it where they're making money, and it's public, small towns providing it where they're losing money. That is a problem for me. So how can we provide state and federal support to make sure that's not the case?
When it comes to the, just the reality of the legislative session, I can't imagine if you walked up to anybody on the street, there'd be anybody that's opposed to funding emergency services. So what is the holdup? What are the issues that you're running into with your colleagues in terms of not being able to get to the target you want?
Well, I think especially when it comes to this rural targeted aid program that we were able to do one time last year, we frankly need a dedicated source. Right? If we're going to create ongoing funding each and every year, to Quinn's question, $50 million a year as sort of our proposal, how do we make sure we have that revenue in order to sort of move that forward? And that's where we're sort of jockeying right now in the legislature. What does that look like? Where do the funds come from? How do we create a sustainable program? I think it's something that we need to have those difficult conversations among colleagues on how we can do that.
Yeah, let me also comment. In the House, the challenge that we have right now in our negotiation, our side of the aisle really are focusing, putting money to the services. The other side of the aisle is looking at assessments, taxes, and keeping MDH at the level that it is right now. Over the last 4 to 5 years, the Minnesota Department of Health has grown by 70%. They don't deliver services. The services are delivered by ambulances and EMS, hospitals, by nurses, and that's where we're having, we have made a lot of moves in our negotiation. The challenge is our other colleagues on the other side has not moved a whole lot by cutting government because, again, it's all about priority. EMS needs to be a priority on both sides of the aisle.
Is there a path forward in the House specifically, considering that you need at least one DFL vote for any of these things to pass? I mean, are there members that you think could be swayed to vote for this?
There's one particular issue that's a roadblock, and there is a lot of things that we agree upon. What I don't want to say is that the other side of the aisle has totally refuse to help with the EMS. That's not what I'm saying. We're still different. EMS is not the roadblock right now. We have another issue that's a roadblock that we have to get through with health, and I think once we get through that, everything else will fall in place. Then we have round two, because then we got to work with the Senate, with the agencies, the governor. So this thing's not over. For people who are political junkies, this is the year to be here.
What's the roadblock? What's the roadblock?
I'm not going to comment on roadblock right now. I'm meeting with the chair, the co-chair on the other side, so it doesn't deal with EMS. Good question, but I will not comment.
Follow that up. I mean, you're talking about, you gotta get through this roadblock first. We're running out of time in the legislative session here. I mean, how much time do you need to clear that roadblock, and could you potentially run out of time on this bill because of that?
We have a lot of time left. There's a lot of time. A lot of things get done pretty quick. We have put together contingency plans on how to handle it if we don't get through it. But our colleagues are committed to work for, our side of the aisle is committed to work across to get this done. That's why we met all weekend. We have 9 offers. I think we get the word of the most offers. So I am very optimistic because health care matters here in Minnesota, and our side of the aisle is here committed, and I'm not saying the other side isn't, but I need to go back to my area. Someone had to cover my call time this weekend because I stayed in St. Paul to negotiate all weekend on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. We're meeting again at 12 o'clock. Chair Bierman and I are meeting again.
Is the goal to have omnibus bills that are done by the end of this deadline that both sides agree to and they just have to move on to the floor? The House could be all together on their omnibus bills?
I believe so. We'll see. I believe so. This is interesting. We want to do the work of Minnesotans.
Do the profitable EMS services, those here in the metro, do they have any responsibility to the not profitable EMS services out in rural Minnesota?
I say we are working together. One thing I want to share with is EMS, Minnesota is a star in the nation. These professionals, and me as a volunteer, us volunteers and professionals, we provide the best EMS service. So, for example, when I have a run that I have to transfer to ALS, or a helicopter comes in from north, or already, we work together. We have worked years together through these challenges without interrupting EMS. And we will continue to figure out what makes sense as the environment changes. We are in this together. We're not private, public, separate in the corners. That's one thing that we've never seen in EMS. We are unified to provide the best emergency health care in the nation, and we are on the front of a lot of things that other states are not doing.
Would anybody be able,
Sorry, just really quick, I just want to make a statement on that too, that, when I got into EMS 22 years ago, it is true that at that time, there were hospital systems and so on that bought ambulance services because it was a profitable industry at that time. But in the reality today, there isn't an area of this state where you would want to get into it as a business. The profit margins are not there today, even in the high volume areas where the operating margins are very minuscule now. And that's the fear is we see that aging population. If the government model doesn't start reimbursing differently, our urban areas are going to be struggling as well. But out in the rural areas is definitely where it's hitting hardest today. But they're kind of two separate things, and funding is, in rural Minnesota, we need to find a way to infuse dollars because they're already being tax subsidized. In the urban areas, it's like we still need to see some improvements on reimbursement in order for those services to continue to function as well.
It's still a net profitable industry in the state, right? So there are profits being made by a lot of businesses, and I'm just wondering if they should also help out in these. If the state just took over the whole EMS system, it would be a net positive for the state.
Yeah, I can speak generally. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Scott Sampe. I'm the chief of North Memorial Ambulance. And we have a large footprint in both the metro here as well as the rural area. And I can tell you there's no large profit there. What we barely make in the metro supports all of our rural. And we no longer have that support. We're under everywhere we are, including in the metro. And that's because some of the payer mix has changed. We have the government payer mix, and there's really no other support.
You're losing money on it everywhere?
Yes. there might be a place here or there, we get a small margin, but it's going to cover the next town we have. That's how we do it.
So it's not true anymore that EMS services are net profitable in Minnesota? Because that was the case that was expressed to us last year, 100%.
Yeah, and the larger health systems do, quite frankly, the majority of the transports in the whole state. And, you know, we're just barely getting by too. You know, it's strained. The hospitals are strained. The ambulance services are strained. Goes across the board.
I was just wondering if, kind of going back to checking on last year's investments, would anybody be able to speak to the Sprint Medic program? I don't know if that's been,
Yeah. Hi. So the Sprint Paramedic Program is operating in Otter Tail and Grant County, as well as a second program up in the St. Louis County area. Our Perham Ambulance is one of the 7 ambulances participating in the West Central Minnesota one in Otter Tail and Grant County. So we have a fully executed grant agreement with the state, and happy to report that just about a week and a half ago, we began operations with that program, with the Sprint Medics responding to the most rural parts of our counties. So we're really excited to begin measuring the success of that program and look for ways that we can take what we learned there and use it for all of our services that are struggling. But this program is really targeted to those volunteer-operated areas. So even for Perham Area EMS, we're really glad to participate. It's great for our community and our greater area, but its benefit is not even targeted to an organization our size. So we're hoping that this lifts the burden off the volunteers and infuses some staff and equipment into our communities that will have a lasting benefit. So we're very excited to begin collecting data and reporting that back to the state and the Office of EMS. Thanks.
That's good. All right, well, we took more of your time than we planned. Leave it at that. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.